Ben Shapiro needed precisely 4 minutes and 17 seconds to cause Ilhan Omar to rue her decision to accept a forum where objective truths outweighed tales of persecution. The exclusive CNN broadcast had been promoted for weeks as a glimpse of America's destiny, a discussion on legislation and morals that theoretically appeared to be premier television. The participants were Ben Shapiro, the right-wing commentator famous for swift dismantling using data, against Representative Ilhan Omar, the liberal lawmaker recognized for sentimental pleas and focus on group identity. The network anticipated a polite conversation, a contemplative trade of viewpoints, and maybe a few shareable clips that would appease viewers from both political spectrums. Instead, they received a slaughter, an orderly and structured dismantling grounded in reality that destroyed Omar's arguments and placed her professional future in grave danger. Omar entered the platform with the assurance of someone who had spent years shielded by a supportive press, protected by group identity, and insulated from intense examination by the liberal elite. She had encountered difficult inquiries previously, but she had always managed to deflect them with charges of bigotry, anti-Muslim bias, or by utilizing the victim strategy. She possessed prepared arguments regarding personal history, disadvantaged groups, and the necessity for compassion over proof. However, Shapiro arrived on stage with a computer, a pile of records, and that faintly entertained look he displays when he realizes he is about to school someone who clearly requires it. He sported his trademark yarmulke, a visible sign that when she attacked Jewish people and Israel, she was targeting someone capable of replying with both personal conviction and crushing evidence. The facilitator Jake Tapper appeared anxious, and rightfully so, as both parties delivered their introductory remarks. Omar talked fervently regarding her experience as an exile, about acting for downtrodden populations, and about striving for fairness and equality. It was a competent address, rehearsed and poignant, intended to pull at emotions while asserting her ethical supremacy. Then Shapiro took his turn speaking. "Congresswoman Omar, I am grateful for that touching opening declaration, and I value the individual history. But here is the problem with individual histories. They are not data. Lived experience does not substitute for proof, emotions do not override statistics, and taking offense does not render you correct. Therefore, let us examine your actual performance, shall we? Because I have dedicated the past few weeks to gathering your legislative choices, your declarations, your monetary records, your public remarks, and your policy stances. And I possess inquiries, numerous inquiries. I intend to talk rapidly because I possess numerous facts to address, and you possess a great deal of justifying to perform." The spectators adjusted in their chairs as Omar's grin wavered just a bit. Tapper appeared as though he was already lamenting taking the job. What transpired subsequently turned into the most viewed governmental debate of the last 10 years. Not because it was competitive, but because it was an absolute and total annihilation supported by truths, figures, and documentation Shapiro had been gathering for ages. Shapiro did not squander moments with niceties. He displayed a chronological chart on the monitor behind him, tapped his computer, and began what can only be characterized as a prosecutorial exposition given at the velocity of a bidder calling a homicide charge. "Let us commence with your nuptials, plural, because they are more intricate than a Christopher Nolan film and less plausible than a Marvel story." Shapiro started by noting that in 2002 you entered a religious union with Ahmed Abdi Salan Hirsi. It was not legally acknowledged by the government, but you have spoken of him as your spouse, which is fine. You produced offspring together. A wonderful American fantasy. I love it. Shapiro's hands were gesturing now, pointing at the timeline on the display. Then in 2009, you formally wed Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. And here is where matters become intriguing And by intriguing, I imply statistically unfeasible to justify innocently. Mr. Elme came into the United States on a scholar's permit in 2009, and weeks later, he wed you. That fact by itself prompts inquiries, because marrying a U.S. national is the quick route to permanent residency and eventual nationality. Convenient scheduling, one might remark. Omar began to break in, but Shapiro spoke more rapidly. But let us proceed. After marrying Mr. Elme, you resided at a separate location, not the identical location, distinct locations. Your kids were registered in school, utilizing Mr. Elm's location as their main home, but you were not residing there. You were staying with Mr. Hersey. Simultaneously, you possessed shared bank accounts with Mr. Elme despite the distinct homes. He clicked to the subsequent batch of fiscal records. Then, in 2014 and 2015, while still legally wed to Mr. Elme, you submitted combined tax forms with Mr. Hersey. That is not an ambiguous zone, Congresswoman. You cannot submit combined tax forms with a person you are not legally wed to. That constitutes tax deceit. Every tax form you autographed contained a declaration that you signed under threat of perjury. You autographed at least 2 untrue tax forms, which amounts to 2 felony charges right there. Shapiro displayed a sequence of migration records on the large monitor, the light of the information shining off his spectacles. Then in 2017, you split from Mr. Elme, and in 2018, you formally wed Mr. Hersey, the very individual you had been residing with and submitting false tax forms with while you were still wed to another person. Now all of this has resulted in very grave public inquiries regarding whether Mr. Elme is actually your sibling, as has been largely claimed and proven by researchers. You have continuously declined to undergo a DNA examination that would conclusively refute this claim if it is untrue. Why not merely undergo the test and terminate the guessing? Unless, naturally, the guessing is completely correct. He pivoted to confront her straight on, leaning into the stand. Let me present the statistical truth for the spectators here. The likelihood of this whole sequence, the scheduling of the student permit, the locations, the tax forms, the school documents, the bank records being a blameless accident is roughly 0.1%, and I am being extremely charitable with that calculation. You would possess better chances of securing the lottery while getting hit by lightning at the same time. These are not merely private errors, Congresswoman. They constitute a design of deliberate fraud. Omar's complexion was clearly red as she clutched the edges of her podium. These are discriminatory conspiracy plots pushed by conservative radicals to invalidate my attendance in this assembly, she retorted. Shapiro instantly raised his palm to interrupt her. Stop! Facts are not bigoted. Documents are not bigoted. Your own autographs on federal papers are not bigoted. Mathematics is not bigoted. Bank files demonstrating you possessed shared accounts with Mr. Elme, despite residing apart, are not bigoted. They are merely files. Migration papers displaying a visa schedule are not bigoted. They are state records. Tax forms with your autograph filing together with Mr. Hersey while you were still legally wed to Mr. Elm are not bigoted. They constitute proof of federal offenses. He leaned in, talking even more rapidly now, the terms landing like a drumbeat. What is genuinely bigoted is the presumption that you should receive an exemption on possible federal offenses due to your background. Equal justice under law. The sentence actually chiseled into the Supreme Court and ingrained in the Constitution you promised to support implies that everybody answers for their behavior identically. You are not distinctive, you are not excluded, and you are not a casualty in this situation. You are a civil servant who must clarify why your marriage schedule, your locations, your tax forms, your bank files, and your rejection to take a DNA exam all indicate a trio of migration, deceit, tax deceit, and perjury. Omar attempted to recover her balance. The claims regarding my sibling have been completely disproven by numerous publications. By whom? Shapiro fired back before she could complete. Not by you undergoing a DNA exam. Not by you supplying paperwork that negates the family connection. Not by you providing any justification for the distinct locations, the shared accounts, or the untrue tax forms. You have simply proclaimed it disproven while declining to supply the very proof that would genuinely disprove it. That is not how data functions, and that is definitely not how evidence functions. You cannot merely utter the term disproven and anticipate physical proof to disappear into thin air. Here is what we comprehend for sure, regardless of the sibling claims. We know you wed Mr. Elme weeks after he landed on a student permit. We know you resided separately. We know your kids were registered at his location. We know you possessed shared accounts. We know you submitted false tax forms. These are proven facts that imply federal offenses. So either you are the most unfortunate individual in American governmental history with the most accidentally dubious pattern of conduct, or you enacted migration deceit, tax deceit, and perjury. Which one is it? The chamber dropped into a weighty quiet. Omar glanced toward Tapper for assistance, but Tapper was gazing down at his papers as if they might hold a getaway path for both of them. Shapiro did not grant Omar any moment to recuperate. He displayed a gigantic spreadsheet on the monitor, columns of figures and dates and computations that made the spectator's eyes expand. Let us discuss your daughter's advisory business. Actually, let me amend that, he stated, fixing his spectacles. Let us discuss your family's money laundering scheme masked as an advisory business. I intend to show this in the shape of a calculation problem, which I realize might be difficult, but remain with me. He gestured at the spreadsheet. This is information from Federal Election Commission submissions between 2018 and 2020. Your campaign paid a firm named the E Street Group $2.7 million. The E Street Group is managed by Tim Minette, who is currently your spouse. Now, let us define market prices, Shapiro proceeded, tapping to a fresh slide. The duties supplied: slate mailers, digital planning, advising. Possess defined market prices. I telephoned 10 political advisory companies, and I received estimates for the tier of service your campaign obtained. The market price is roughly $5,000 to $10,000 per election period. You paid between $75,000 and $150,000 per period. That constitutes 15 times the market price. He began computing on the screen, the figures blinking in red. Over the duration in question, the market price for duties performed was roughly $300,000. The sum actually paid was $2.7 million. The surplus payment is $2.4 million. That is not a rounding mistake. That is not a surcharge for superior services. That constitutes transforming campaign money into private family earnings by hugely overpaying for duties. Shapiro displayed comparison data from other legislative contests. Let us examine other campaigns. Other members of Congress running in comparable areas with comparable funds paid an average of $180,000 for similar duties over the identical duration. You paid $2.7 million. You paid 15 times what your peers paid. The only factor that excuses that surcharge is that the cash was going to someone personally linked to you. He tapped through more information, his speed increasing. But it improves. Let us examine the timeline. April 2018, first payment to E Street Group. June 2018, you and Mr. Minette are pictured together in Los Angeles, both wed to other individuals at that time. September 2019, you submitted for separation. October 2019 through March 2020, payments to E Street Group surged to over $600,000 in merely 6 months. November 2020, you wed Mr. Minette. Shapiro turned to Omar, his look one of feigned inquisitiveness. So the payments commenced when your connection commenced. They grew substantially as your connection progressed. They resulted in over $2 million being paid above market prices, and now you are wed to the individual receiving the cash. That is not advising, Congresswoman. That is campaign fund transformation to private gain through a romantic connection. He displayed FEC complaint paperwork. Multiple complaints have been submitted regarding these payments. The FEC possesses explicit regulations against the private usage of campaign money. You cannot utilize donor cash for private gain. But if you overpay a consultant who is also your romantic partner by $2 million, that is practically the identical thing. You are merely processing it through a business instead of writing yourself a draft. Shapiro began rapidly going through the fiscal analysis once again. Let us break down the calculation for the spectators. Total paid $2.7 million. Market price, $300,000. Overpayment, $2.4 million. If we presume this overpayment went to aid you privately through your connection with Mr. Minette, that is $2.4 million in campaign money converted to private gain. That constitutes a breach of federal election statute. That constitutes possibly criminal transformation of campaign money. Omar attempted to guard herself, stating that the FEC examined the payments. Shapiro interrupted immediately. The FEC endorsed payments to an advisory firm. They did not endorse paying 15 times the market price. That is the deceit. You utilize a gap by overpaying. Technically lawful does not make it moral. And it does not alter the truth that you enriched someone personally linked to you with donor cash. He displayed the donor rosters showing names of ordinary laborers. These are your contributors, working individuals, people who donated $25, $50, or $100 because they trusted you would battle for them. Instead, you gave $2.4 million in surplus payments to your romantic partner's business. That is not battling for working individuals. That is utilizing working people's gifts to enrich yourself and your kin. The final point is this. Market price was $300,000. You paid $2.7 million. If I did this, or if any Republican did this, you would be demanding a prosecution. But when you perform it, you believe it is permissible. No, it constitutes corruption. It is measurable, mathematical, demonstrate able corruption, and the electors deserve to know you are enriching your kin with their gifts, while claiming to be their defender. Shapiro's look shifted, becoming visibly frostier. This was personal now, and everyone in the chamber could sense the temperature fall. When he spoke again, his voice possessed a sharpness it hadn't carried in the prior rounds. "Now we arrive at my preferred subject," he stated with profound, cutting irony. "Your opinions on Jewish people and Israel. I am Jewish. I wear a yarmulke. I am pro-Israel. So when you devote years establishing you are prejudiced, I tend to observe. Let us examine your biggest hits, shall we? I have gathered them by date so we can view the design of intolerance evolve." He displayed a sequence of tweet records on the gigantic monitors. November 2012, before you were even in Congress, you tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the globe. May Allah wake the people and help them view the evil acts of Israel." Let us dissect that phrase, hypnotize the globe. That constitutes traditional anti-Semitic imagery of Jewish mental domination. It is a theme that extends back centuries, the notion of Jews covertly managing world events through hypnosis or handling. You utilized that precise theme regarding the world's sole Jewish nation. Shapiro tapped to the subsequent tweet before she could reply. February 2019, you tweeted, "It is all about the Benjamin's baby," in reply to a query about why U.S. politicians back Israel. That constitutes another vintage anti-Semitic theme, Jews utilizing cash to control government. When challenged by members of your own group, including Jewish Democrats, you released a non-apology apology and claimed you did not know it was insulting. But you knew. You certainly knew. He displayed more declarations, his speed increasing. You have likened Israel to the Taliban. You have likened Israel to terrorist groups. You have characterized Israeli safety measures as wicked and apartheid. Oddly, you have never utilized this language regarding China, which possesses actual internment camps for Uyghurs. You have never utilized it regarding Iran, which stones women and hangs homosexual individuals. You have never utilized it regarding Saudi Arabia, which possesses zero religious liberty. You save your severest, most toxic rhetoric entirely for the single Jewish nation. Shapiro then displayed her actual legislative records. You voted against Iron Dome financing. That constitutes a strictly protective system. It shoots down missiles fired at Israeli civilians. It does not kill anybody. It merely stops Israelis from being killed by terrorists. You voted against financing it. Why? What conceivable reason could you possess for resisting a protective system that preserves civilian lives unless you do not desire those specific civilians to live? He tapped through more votes, the data appearing in rapid succession. You voted against resolutions condemning BDS, a movement that seeks the complete removal of Israel as a Jewish nation. You have resisted designating terrorist groups as terrorists when those groups target Jews. You have backed UN resolutions condemning Israel while resisting resolutions condemning actual savage human rights violators. Shapiro then showed data from the Anti-Defamation League. The ADL monitors anti-Semitic events. After your Benjamin's tweet, anti-Semitic events jumped by 23% in a 2-week span. Your rhetoric aligns directly with rises in anti-Semitic assaults. Your words possess outcomes. Jewish Americans confront violence, and your words encourage the attackers. He turned to confront Omar directly, his eyes tightening. You have invoked mind control. You have invoked money manipulation. You have minimized terrorism against Jews. We will arrive at your "some people did something" comment shortly. You have likened the Jewish nation to the Taliban, and when challenged, you conceal behind the pretext of policy critique. I critique Israeli policy constantly. I am critical of the Israeli government often. But I do not utilize language from the protocols of the elders of Zion to perform it. I do not invoke centuries-old anti-Semitic themes. I do not compare Israel to terrorist groups while granting actual terrorist-supporting regimes a pass. That constitutes the distinction between valid policy critique and anti-Semitism. Omar attempted to interrupt, claiming her right to critique the Israeli government without being branded. Shapiro was almost yelling now, his words arriving even faster. Critique away. Critique settlements. Critique the government. Critique specific policies. But when you state Jews have hypnotized the globe, that is not policy critique. That constitutes blood libel. When you state it is all about the Benjamins, that is not policy critique. That constitutes invoking the myth of Jewish money controlling government. When you liken Israel to the Taliban, While Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East with equal rights for women and LGBT individuals, that is not policy critique. That constitutes an anti-Semitic fixation. Your own party leadership has scolded you, but you never actually alter. You merely become more cautious with your wording while upholding the same anti-Jewish hostility. You possess a problem with Jews, Congresswoman. Your words demonstrate it, your votes demonstrate it, and your selective anger demonstrates it. Shapiro's face was stern as he displayed audio files, video segments, and voting records. This round was clearly intended to query Omar's basic allegiance to the nation that had granted her shelter. "Let us discuss your pledge of office," Shapiro commenced, his voice slicing through the strain. "I possess it here, and it is remarkably brief. It states, 'I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.' Notice, Congresswoman, it does not state support and defend Somalia. So let us talk about where your loyalties actually reside." He tapped play on an audio file, and Omar's voice occupied the room. "We are Somali first, Muslim second, American third." Shapiro halted the recording instantly. "That is you speaking to a Somali community group in 2023. You stated you are Somali first and American third. Those are not my words describing your stance. Those are your own words. Your pledge states you will defend the Constitution of the United States, but apparently that duty comes in a distant third after your Somali and religious identities." He displayed her voting records to align her words with her deeds. "Let us view the pattern. Every time there is a vote involving the Horn of Africa, you side with Somalia over U.S. allies. Ethiopia, a crucial U.S. partner in counterterrorism, versus Somalia. You side with Somalia. Kenya, another U.S. ally, versus Somalia in a territorial conflict, you side with Somalia. When the State Department suggested sanctions on Somali officials for blatant corruption, you opposed them." Shapiro tapped through more data. "You opposed military action against al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist group responsible for thousands of deaths. You have consistently voted against designating them as terrorists. Every single time. You side with Somalia against American interests." Shapiro then displayed a sequence of meeting records. "You met with Somali government officials before official U.S. delegations even arrived. You discussed U.S. policy towards Somalia before being briefed by our own State Department. You have argued for positions perfectly aligned with the Somali government before those positions were even introduced to you through official channels. How did you know precisely what to argue for unless you were being briefed by a foreign government?" He then shifted to campaign finance. "Your campaign has received significant donations from individuals with documented links to the Somali government. The pattern is plain. Money moves from Somalia-connected individuals to your campaign, and you argue for Somalia-aligned positions in return." He looked at Omar with a gaze of sharp intensity. "When U.S. interests clash with Somali interests, which do you prioritize? Because your voting record states Somalia. Your public statements, Somali first, American third, state Somalia. Your meetings and advocacy state Somalia. Your pledge states America, but your conduct states Somalia. That isn't representing your constituents. That constitutes acting as a representative for a foreign government." Omar shook her head, claiming she was representing the interests of her Somali-American constituents. Shapiro cut her off. "They are Americans. They happen to possess Somali ancestry, but you represent Americans. When you take a pledge to America, You owe your loyalty to America. You do not get to divide your loyalty. You came to America as a refugee, Shapiro continued, his voice climbing. America granted you safety when Somalia could not. America granted you opportunity, education, and the liberty to run for office. And you responded by stating, America comes third. That isn't gratitude. It constitutes a betrayal of the faith placed in you. He pointed to her voting data one final time. When U.S. interests and Somali interests diverge, you pick Somalia. That isn't a coincidence. It constitutes the prioritization of a foreign nation over your pledge of office. Imagine any other member of Congress stating they were another country first and American third. The reaction would be universal condemnation. But when you perform it, we are supposed to disregard it. No equal standards. Your pledge is to America, and your loyalty should be to America. Period. Shapiro's face was stern now. This was the moment everyone in the room had been stealing for. The confrontation over the most insulting statement Omar had ever uttered in public office. Let us talk about September 11th, 2001, Shapiro commenced, his voice falling to a low, intense frequency. The worst terrorist attack in American history. The day that altered everything. Most Americans recall exactly where they were. I was 13 years old. I recall nearly 3,000 Americans murdered by 19 al-Qaeda terrorists. 4 planes hijacked, 2 towers collapsed, the Pentagon attacked, and heroes in Pennsylvania stopping a 4th assault. It is burned into our collective memory. But you, Congresswoman, you have described it differently. He tapped his computer, and a video clip occupied the screen. It was Omar speaking at a CARE event, her voice reverberating through the speakers. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Shapiro halted the video instantly. Some people did something. That is how you described September 11th. Some people did something. Let us analyze that phrase word by word. Some people, not 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, not specific monsters with names and faces who chose evil, just some people, as if they were a random sampling of humanity. He tapped through more of her public declarations, a side-by-side comparison appearing on the monitors. Let us compare how you describe other tragedies. The Christchurch mosque shooting, you called it terrorism rooted in white supremacy and spoke about the massacre of 50 innocent Muslims, specific, detailed, passionate. The El Paso shooting, you called it white nationalist terrorism and a racist attack targeting Latinos. Again, specific perpetrators, specific victims, specific evil. Shapiro's hands were moving rapidly now. George Floyd, you spoke for hours. Detailed descriptions of injustice, racism, specific officers, specific actions. You are capable of specificity when it fits your narrative. He turned back to the 9/11 quote. But for the worst terrorist attack in American history, it is just some people did something. Not al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked planes and murdered 2,177 Americans. Not 19 jihadists committed mass murder. Just some people did something, as if they littered or cut in line or were mildly rude. I possess statements here from first responders, firefighters who were there, police officers who ran toward the towers, paramedics who treated victims. They heard your comment. Want to know how they reacted? They stated it felt like being stabbed again, like their sacrifice was being minimized, like the worst day of their lives was being reduced to a footnote. Shapiro then displayed letters from 9/11 families. These are widows, children who lost parents, parents who lost children. One woman wrote, "I watched my husband die on live television. Some people did something. No, terrorists murdered him. Say their names, honor the victims by naming the evil." But you didn't say their names, Alexandria. Excuse me, Ilhan. You didn't describe what they did. You minimized it. And you did it at an event for CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, an organization named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history. An organization with multiple officials convicted of terrorism-related charges. You chose to speak at their event. Shapiro continued, his voice climbing, where you minimized 9/11 while defending CARE's founding. 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes and murdered nearly 3,000 people. That is not some people doing something. That constitutes specific evil. You describe white supremacist attacks with passionate specificity, but when the perpetrators are Muslim terrorists, you use passive, vague language. Why? Because naming them and their ideology would complicate your politics. So you minimize, you reduce mass murder to a something, and then immediately pivot to how Muslims were the real victims because they faced scrutiny afterward. Nearly 3,000 people died. Families are still grieving. And your takeaway is that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. That isn't empathy, Congresswoman. It constitutes moral bankruptcy. Shapiro shifted gears, moving from moral and national security questions to purely intellectual ones. His expression took on a pedantic, almost academic sharpness, signaling that he was about to provide an education whether Omar wanted it or not. "Let us test your understanding of basic economics, Congresswoman," he commenced. "Because you are out here making economic policy for 330 million people, despite apparently not understanding how a balance sheet works. You were one of the loudest voices celebrating when you helped kill the Amazon HQ2 deal in New York. So pop quiz, what exactly is a tax incentive?" Omar blinked, adjusting her microphone. "A tax incentive is when the government gives corporations—" "Stop!" Shapiro held up his hand, cutting her off instantly. "You have already failed the quiz. The government does not give anything in a tax incentive. Let me explain how this actually works for the people at home. And you might want to take notes, because this is important." He tapped up a simple high-contrast diagram on the screen. A tax incentive implies a company pays less in taxes than they otherwise would. It is not money the government currently possesses. It is not cash sitting in a bank account. It is future revenue that the government agrees not to collect in exchange for massive economic activity. If the company does not come, that revenue does not exist. Zero. Nothing. If the company does come with incentives, the government gets some revenue, and some is more than zero. This constitutes basic math. Shapiro tapped up the specific numbers from the Amazon deal. Amazon HQ2 in New York, 25,000 to 40,000 jobs, average salary $150,000. $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. You celebrated killing this. You stated, and I quote, "We saved $3 billion. Let us check your math." He started writing on the digital whiteboard. If Amazon does not come, the tax revenue from those 25,000 jobs is zero. The corporate tax from Amazon is zero. The local economic activity is zero. Total benefit to New York, zero. Now, if Amazon comes with those $3 billion in incentives, the income tax revenue alone from 25,000 jobs paying $150,000 is approximately $400 million per year. Over 10 years, that is $4 billion in income tax revenue for the city and state. So, Shapiro continued, looking at Omar, New York agrees to not collect $3 billion in order to gain $4 billion in income taxes. That constitutes a net gain of $1 billion. But wait, Amazon also pays corporate taxes, property taxes, and those 25,000 employees spend money in the local economy generating sales tax. Total new revenue for New York was estimated at $8 billion. But you told the public you saved $3 billion. You didn't save a dime. That $3 billion never existed. It was a discount on a bill that now will never be sent. By killing the deal, you cost New York $8 billion in revenue. You didn't save money. You set a pile of potential billions on fire because you don't understand the difference between not collecting future money and spending current money. He tapped through more analysis. Economists across the political spectrum, left, right, and independent, all agreed this was a massive net positive for New York. But let us talk about the people, not the numbers. 25,000 jobs with a $150,000 average salary. Those aren't just corporate executives. Those are programmers, HR staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, and administrators. Those are middle-class jobs that support families. You killed 25,000 opportunities for working people because you thought a tax incentive was a check being written to Jeff Bezos. That isn't just wrong, Congresswoman. That constitutes dangerous economic illiteracy in a position of power. You are using words like welfare and incentive interchangeably, and it is costing the American people their livelihoods. Shapiro tapped up what looked like a budget breakdown on steroids, a wall of numbers, calculations, and devastating projections that made the audience collectively wince. Let us discuss your actual policy proposals, he stated, his voice taking on a clinical, analytical edge. I am going to present them, explain what they would actually do using real arithmetic, and then ask you to defend the math. This should be fun for me, definitely not for you. He tapped through the slides with rhythmic precision. Medicare for All. You co-sponsored it. The estimated cost, according to the Urban Institute, is $32 trillion over 10 years. Currently, total federal revenue is approximately $4.5 trillion per year, which equals $45 trillion over a decade. That implies Medicare for All alone would consume 71% of all federal revenue. That leaves exactly 29% for everything else. Defense, Social Security, infrastructure, the very existence of the government. But we are just getting started. Shapiro didn't pause for a breath. The Green New Deal. You co-sponsored that too. Cost estimate by the American Action Forum, $93 trillion over 10 years. Let us add those together. 32 plus 93 equals $125 trillion. Your projected federal revenue is $45 trillion. You are proposing to spend $125 trillion when you only have $45 trillion. You are short $80 trillion. He started calculating on the screen, his fingers flying. Let us see if we can find that $80 trillion, shall we? Total wealth of all American billionaires combined, approximately $4.5 trillion. Confiscate every single penny of it. Make them all destitute, seize their assets. Take everything, and you've funded your proposals for approximately 4 months. Then what? Tax corporations. Total corporate profits are approximately $2 trillion per year. Tax them at 100%. Put every corporation in America out of business. Crash the stock market and end the private sector. And you get $20 trillion over 10 years. You are still $60 trillion short. Shapiro tapped up more analysis, shifting from the cost to the consequences. But let us talk about what your proposals would actually do to people. Medicare for all eliminates private insurance. That implies 150 million Americans lose their current coverage. Healthcare costs don't decrease, they are just paid by the government instead of private entities. And quality decreases because government-run systems always reduce quality and increase wait times. Just ask anyone in the UK or Canada. Then there is defund the police. You supported this. Minneapolis, your own district, implemented it. Result, crime increased 40%. Murders are up, assaults are up, property crime is up. Businesses are leaving and people are fleeing. And the victims are overwhelmingly the minority communities you claim to represent. Your policy literally hurt them. He was on a roll now. The momentum building. Open borders. You support abolishing ICE and decriminalizing all the illegal border crossings. The cost of illegal immigration, according to FAIR, is approximately $100 billion per year in healthcare, education, and social services. You want to increase that cost while making it easier to enter. Free college, approximately $80 billion per year. Who benefits? Mostly middle and upper middle class students. Who pays? Everyone through taxes. You are proposing a massive transfer of wealth from working class people who didn't go to college to relatively privileged students who did. The same goes for student loan forgiveness, $1.7 trillion. You are asking a plumber in Ohio to pay for the graduate degree of a lawyer in D.C. That is not progressive. It is regressive. Shapiro turned to face Omar, his expression one of sharp disbelief. Every policy you support possesses the same three problems: massive cost, zero funding mechanism, and disastrous outcomes. You have proposed policies costing $125 trillion when the revenue is $45 trillion. Even if you taxed every billionaire and every corporation out of existence, you are still $60 trillion short. Your proposals are not ambitious, Congresswoman. They constitute mathematically impossible fairy tales. They are economic fantasies that would bankrupt the country in a matter of months. Omar attempted to respond, her voice strained. We have to be ambitious about transforming our economy to work for everyone. Ambitious doesn't mean impossible, Shapiro shouted, finally letting his volume match his speed. Ambitious doesn't mean ignoring basic arithmetic. You can be as ambitious as you want, but you still have to fund your proposals with actual money that actually exists. You can't just wave a magic wand and make $80 trillion appear out of thin air. And when your policies are actually implemented, like defund the police, people die. Crime increases. Communities suffer. These aren't just bad ideas. They constitute dangerous delusions dressed up as policy, and the math shows they are a total fiction. Shapiro stood up, gathering every document, spreadsheet, and chart he had utilized throughout the debate, and stacked them into a single imposing pile on the lectern. This was the moment of total synthesis. The comprehensive destruction of Ilhan Omar's career delivered at maximum speed. Let us review your career, Congresswoman, he stated, his voice reaching a crescendo of intensity. I am going to speak quickly, because there is a lot to cover, and almost all of it is terrible. Pay attention. Marriage fraud, Shapiro commenced, the words hitting like hammer blows. You wed Ahmed Elmey under highly suspicious circumstances suggesting immigration fraud. You resided at separate addresses, your children were listed at his residence, you had joint accounts, and you filed false tax returns with Ahmed Hersi while still legally wed to Elmey. You have refused DNA testing that would settle the matter instantly. The statistical probability of this being an innocent coincidence is effectively zero. That constitutes immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury, multiple federal felonies. He didn't slow down for a second. Family enrichment. You paid Tim Manette's company $2.7 million for services worth roughly $300,000. That constitutes a $2.4 million overpayment to a man you were romantically involved with and eventually married. That constitutes a campaign fund conversion to personal benefit. That constitutes corruption quantified. Anti-Semitism. You have invoked tropes of hypnosis and money control, compared Israel to the Taliban, minimized terrorism against Jews, and opposed defensive systems that protect civilians. Your rhetoric correlates with spikes in anti-Semitic violence. Members of your own party have condemned you. That is not policy criticism. It constitutes blatant bigotry. Shapiro was accelerating now, his voice filled with an edge of moral indignation. Foreign loyalty. You stated Somali first, American third. You have consistently voted for Somali interests over American ones, met with their officials before our own State Department, and received donations from Somali-connected individuals while advocating for their government's positions. That constitutes a violation of your pledge. 9/11. Minimization. You called the worst terrorist attack in our history. Some people did something while speaking for an organization with documented terror links. You have never truly apologized to the first responders or the families who felt stabbed by your words. That constitutes moral bankruptcy. Economic illiteracy, he continued, gesturing toward the spreadsheets. You killed 25,000 jobs in New York because you don't understand how tax incentives work. You have proposed $125 trillion in spending with only $45 trillion in revenue. You are $80 trillion short of reality. Your policies, when implemented, increase crime and hurt the very communities you claim to represent. That constitutes dangerous ignorance in a position of power. Ethics violations. You have been fined by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board, investigated for misusing funds, and potentially violated FARA regulations. You have enriched your family, violated rules, and faced minimal consequences because you hide behind identity politics every time someone presents the facts. Shapiro looked directly at Omar, who sat in stunned silence. Here is your career in summary. America took you in as a refugee. It granted you safety, opportunity, and power. You responded by potentially committing immigration fraud, enriching your family with donor money, using anti-Semitic rhetoric, and saying America comes third in your loyalties. You have minimized terrorism, killed jobs through ignorance, and proposed impossible policies that would destroy the economy. You have weaponized identity to shield yourself from accountability and used victimhood to deflect from corruption. You have taken everything America granted you and spat in its face. He looked at the camera for his final statement. The facts do not care about your feelings, Congresswoman. They do not care about your identity. The facts show potential felonies, family corruption, bigotry, and a betrayal of your pledge. You had every advantage this country could grant, and you squandered it on destruction and self-interest. The American people deserve better than you, and the data proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. The room sat in an absolute heavy silence as Shapiro sat back down. Omar looked like she had been hit by an intellectual freight train traveling at 200 words per minute. Within 72 hours, the debate had accumulated over 150 million views. 73% of viewers, including a significant portion of independents and Democrats, admitted Shapiro had won decisively. Within weeks, The House Ethics Committee and the FBI confirmed they were reviewing the evidence presented on national television. A primary challenger emerged, a Somali-American veteran running on America First. And 6 months later, Omar lost her seat by 23 points. Her career was built on the sand of identity politics, and it took Ben Shapiro 2 hours to wash it away with the tide of facts. Shapiro, when asked about it on his podcast, was characteristically direct. I didn't end her career. Her conduct ended her career. I just made sure people saw the facts. If presenting evidence at 200 words per minute destroys your career, maybe your career was built on a lie.